Ready. So it is week 3 in CIT85, HTML, and CSS. And this week we transition from HTML to CSS. So it's perfectly named in that sense. Today is actually before the start of this class. This is coming into your beginning of your class and ending week 9 in the regular semester. And one of the things I wanted to say today is that I really love technology. I mean, I've been doing it for more number of years than I'd probably like to admit, but I still really enjoy it. But it still trips me out sometimes just how much of my life revolves around it. So the reason I'm saying this today is that we just got that emergency broadcast notice, right? On our phones at this point right before I started to record, and I was just like, what? Right? I don't normally hear that sound on it. But then I've been reading some other things about this test and why this test is important, but also where this test could cause people some real challenges. So it's very interesting to think about the impacts. Now, the test itself is not that big of a deal, although the fact that the government could reach out in the way that they do and tell us, hey, there's an emergency in your area, make sure you act accordingly. We always had these broadcasts on the television and still do. But because so many of us are on our phones, without our phones feels weird. Only speaking for me. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in this week as we start into week 3 before this semester starts. And I just finished. I literally just finished a little while ago. And if you didn't hear me say this before, this course, the way it's set up and the way I'm running it, all the written instruction and the group exercises and all that is new. I'm doing it as we go, which I always run a little bit of a risk in case something happens for me during that week, because it's a pretty tight schedule, because I'm doing the same thing for CIT93 for those of you taking JavaScript. But this week I'm successful. It's Wednesday and it's August 4th, and I'm finishing this class and I'll start working on JavaScript next. Anyway, into this week. So one of the things you're going to do this week on Monday, right, is like you've done before, right? You're going to take your week 2, right, your last code along for week 2. Now that's not the group stuff. That's not the public. This is the private repo, right? And then you will copy that ending code, create a new in this case W3 HTML underscore HTML folder in your private, and you will copy that ending code into the starting code for week 3. Okay, so let's pause right now, see if you can do that on your own. Come back when you're done. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so hopefully you're done. So if you're not sure how to do this, right, I have the root, which you start to see getting populated as people start submitting, which is awesome. So in this case, right, I've showed you last week, and by the way, by the time you get to Thursday night's item, you will also see this, right? So when you click in here, now in the case of I'm showing you here, this is because I have the root, the CIT85 as the root, set as a root. That's what I have open. So then when I would go to do new folder, right, that would then create it at that level. So then create the folder first and then go in here and then copy all that content, right? So you can just hit Control C. And I don't know if I even showed you last week how to do it, right? And then Control V here. So just that's how you would do it, right? So how'd you do? So one of the replies you can do is tell me, were you able to do that without issue? Okay, so this week I really like the coverage in the HTML part of our week of semantic tags. And the understanding, which I think Dave he touches on the guidelines for understanding the semantic tags that he shows, right? The article, the section, And he shows some new ones I actually hadn't seen before, which was the summary and the details, which was fun as well. And again, you haven't gotten there yet, so you don't maybe know what I'm referring to. But one of the things Dave talks about, and I think is really helpful, and I definitely recommend using it because I can see us using this in the future, is this Chrome extension, right? For looking at the layout, because the thing you're learning during the semantic tag section of this for the HTML is not how to structure the page the way we see it. It's the way accessibility readers would be able to break down the page to give somebody who's just listening to a web page spoken to them. Here, right? They pull up a screen reader. It will tell them, here's the page, and the way we lay that page out for using these semantic elements make it hopefully more accessible, more readily digestible to people with whatever physical, mental, whatever challenges they may come with. So in this case, when I did this, when I tried to install, and here's the icon itself. When I first did it, I kept installing it, so it'll say go to the Chrome web store, right? Which is a fairly common thing to do. Web store, right? If you come here, oh, not that one. Oh, it is there too as well. So it's also here, right? And then you would search for the HTML5 outliner. There it is. And this is the one he recommends. It is pretty old. That's the other thing I did notice. You can tell I already have it, but one of the things I always do before I install extensions, because extensions because they're little bunches, they're little packets of code that somebody wrote, and they're making, trying to make your life easier. But you just want to, like anything you install in your system, be a little suspect before you do stuff like that. I was a little concerned when I didn't see it had been updated since 2020. But I could see where something like this wouldn't need to be. Okay, but here's my point of this whole topic, is it really is helpful once you learn in this section about that outliner, HTML outliner. Am I saying that right? Outliner is actually get it to show up. And one of the things I had to do here was I actually had to go over here. Let me just move this out for a minute because mine wasn't showing up, right? Let me drop this just for a second, just for a minute, right? So what happened is I came here. No, it wasn't here. Oh, where was it that I actually ended up coming? Hold on. All right, on this icon right here, because I've never had to come in here for whatever crazy reason. But let me if I make this larger, it doesn't make the bar larger. But when you come into extensions, what happened was it was here, but it wasn't pinned, so I couldn't see it. And so what you need to do is pin that. And when you do that, then when you go to a web page, right? So if you go to, and by the way, this is actually really fun to do as well. Like if you go to, let me think of, I was actually looking up because my shirt is MKBHD. I love this guy, Marcus Brownlee, right? So if I go to his YouTube site, or if I just look on here and I pulled this, it would show me an outline, right? This is great. I mean, it's really good to start thinking about, like, looking at pages and thinking about how they're laid out for semantic, somebody looking for it. Because look, like if you're reading this and here's your major, right, things that you would want somebody to know about. So anyway, just good to know that, and to be able to, let me bring that back, right? This is a Pride shirt I got from him. This is his design. I watch him. He's a great. If you don't, I suspect most of you do, but if you don't, okay. Coming back here, Chrome extension. There you go. So the other thing about this is learning, and this is also true when we move into CSS, how to use dev tools. For those of you taking 93 of my JavaScript class, or even those of you that have taken 82, you know I harp a bit on Chrome DevTools. Now, other browsers have DevTools like as well, but I think Google has really done a heavy investment of their time and talent to make Chrome's tool better. And I say that not just from my own experience, but talking to developers. And I'm lucky enough to have actually interfaced with some of the folks on at Google on the Chrome Dev tool team. And it's great to understand their commitment to really making developers, right, us and us aspiring, making our lives easier. So if you don't know, right, any page you go to, you can right click, and this is going to be true of your own pages as well. And when you hit inspect, right now in the case like this, there's just so much. It's overwhelming. But once you start writing code, it becomes less overwhelming. And once we moved into CSS and you start to understand the cascading effect of CSS, so helpful. So just know how to get in. So again, here's what I did is I just right clicked on any page, hit inspect. And then what's cool is you can also, as you move through the code, notice how it highlights the page. You can see then this HTML is, in this case, it's a div. And I love how in the course, he actually is going to say to move away from divs. So this was a great reminder for me because in teaching JavaScript, I still was using divs, and I'm like, I could totally move away from that. So, and they often call this divitis. So, anyway, just not try to use DevTools. It will be your friend. Now, the other thing is when you're going through the course, and Dave talks about, okay, validate your code. I would recommend validating your code right before you do commits every time. And it's just so easy to do. Now, if you're using the site, that's fine. But as we move into CSS, and I noted this in the file, is that you can use that same built-in tool, right? So if I was to bring up my CSS here, right, and I had my CSS open, I could also use that same tool for validating my CSS. So it just seems easier to me, right? If you have any, that's an extension. I already talked about how to do that last time. At the end, and this is referring back to the HTML that we don't do the last number 10, the project, mostly because I'm thinking about how we're going to integrate that. And so, again, I got some already, Jacqueline came through and gave me some good input. So just FYI. Okay, so Thursday you start CSS code alongs, right? So this week we don't have any group work. This week is all about the code along, right? And learning, right? Doing those commits. And I know I said this in the first week, but it really is good. Like you read my instruction before, right? If you've just done a commit, or you just look through it, you have it sometimes maybe sitting on another device, or depending on your setup. You read through the next one so that you have an idea about when to do that commit, because the idea is not to make it harder, but the idea is for you to keep track so that you get those, because that's how I grade. Honestly, how else could I grade with this? Because the code is given to you. It would be, and again, but a class like this is really meant for you to learn. And the only way in my book that you really take the concepts that you're hearing and make it something that you can use is through muscle memory, which is why colongs is something I've been implementing for several years now, because I think they're just a way to take something that's conceptual abstract into something that you actually can understand and feel. So, FYI about that. And then there's two links I'm going to provide here in the bottom. One, and both of them are to MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, which is pretty much the standard for documentation for all things web. And they provide great, their documentation is definitely for beginners and even for people who have been around a little while, often hard to read. But they provide these guides that I think are really good. And so I've given you to both the HTML one right? So I think they're worth looking through. I think they're worth, you know, and again, help you create depth in your knowledge as you learn more skills because you combine those two things together. That's a great thing. Okay. In my opinion. Okay, last thing, I didn't actually put this in my notes, but if you haven't seen this already, where when you run live server, right? When you have whatever folder you have open, right? Or whatever, if you have the base folder open, then I would get a different list here. Actually, no, I think I do have the base. And how do I know? Matter of fact, this is how I check your work. I look at your commits and then I pull your code into my system and then I actually look at it and run it and, evaluate it. So I do multiple passes through your commits to see, did you nail those? Did you submit it right? And how did your code look? Did you get all the pieces? Like in this week, Dave codes up tables. Oh, that's what I wanted to show you. I'm so glad I remembered. One of the things I realized, I don't know why I didn't know this before, probably because I just didn't need to. But when you're watching Dave, you probably already know this, but I'm going to stop him and you can use I'm using the right back and forward. Let me move this to show you. So I can just, like, if I'm trying to figure out what I missed, right? I can just use the back and it'll go back 5 seconds. I can go forward. So I found, again, I have a hard time believing I didn't know that. I do. And by the way, that actually speaks to speeding up. And what you'll have to do is figure out for you how well, because YouTube, one of the great things about YouTube is you can speed it up. Any player really these days you can. You have to figure out if that works for you because you don't want to miss concepts. And when you're coding along, you don't want to miss code as well. Okay, so back here, what do you reply with, right? You could reply with, did you get that folder set up? Do you have any other feedback about any of the topics that I've covered today? Do you know MKBHD? Right? Did you know I did volunteer work for Google? I did. I helped build communities both locally and nationally and internationally, which was totally fun. I don't do it anymore, mostly because there's other things I like to focus on. But, what other questions might you have at this point? I don't know. Post them. Let's see. Peace out.